I switched the briefcase at 2:47 a.m. By 3 o'clock, the pilot was in the air. By noon, he was falling out of the sky over the Soviet Union. The file inside wasn't supposed to exist. The code was dead. The courier was already buried. And the name on the envelope was mine. Lisbon, 1960. A rented room. A black briefcase that wasn't mine. No one ever asked questions, and I stopped offering answers the day I realized what was in that case. I don't know how many people died because of what I did. I just know it wasn't the man they expected. This isn't a war story. It's a confession, because the moment that briefcase changed hands, Berlin started burning. If you're still listening, subscribe and tell me where in the world you're watching this and what time it is. I like to know who still believes in ghosts. The room smelled like old wood and oranges. Lisbon, 1960. The pension was run by a widow who didn't ask names, just cash up front. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the briefcase. Not the one I'd arrived with. Mine was still at the train station locker, key buried under loose tile in the shower stall. This one had a new leather handle and corners that hadn't yet softened with use. But inside, it rattled like something unfinished. I hadn't opened it. Not yet. My hands were steady, but my stomach wasn't. I lit a cigarette and let the smoke crawl toward the ceiling fan. If they were right, this would be the last quiet room I ever sat in. 36 years later, I still remember the way that silence clung to the window panes. The briefcase wasn't mine. But what scared me most is that it felt familiar. It wasn't just a swap. It was a rewrite. The original briefcase had my prints, my scent, my creases. I'd carried it across Zurich, Vienna, Prague. It was part of me. This one was perfect, clean, intentional. And someone had left it where only I would find it, behind the frame in the hallway, right next to the broken payphone. It was supposed to be empty space. Maintenance access. Only field agents would know. The note had no words. Just a stamp. DS-47. A code from a program. We shut down in 57. Cancelled. Declassified. Erased. But the paper was fresh. I picked up the briefcase. It was heavier than mine. Something inside shifted. Not papers. Not maps. Something dense. I should have walked away, reported it, flagged it. Instead, I ran my thumb along the zipper and put it on the bed. Then I killed the lights, sat in the dark, and listened. For what? I still don't know. There was a knock around midnight. 3 soft, 1 sharp. I drew the curtain slightly. Just a figure. Man, tall, hat low. He didn't wait. Just slipped a coin under the door. I knew what that meant. Proceed. Number. Backup. Final warning. I paced the room for 20 minutes. Smoked another cigarette. My own briefcase was still hidden, still untouched. But this one, I kept looking at it like it might breathe. The zipper screamed when I pulled it open. Inside, 3 files. A passport and a sealed envelope with my name. Not my cover name. My real name typed in red ink. That envelope never made it back to Washington. I burned it 2 days later in a train station toilet in Munich. But I remember every word, especially the last line. Do this and you never existed. I believed it. I still kind of do. At dawn, I walked the streets like a man waiting to be shot. The city was still asleep. Newspapers weren't out yet. Tourists hadn't begun their lie-filled walks. I passed a bakery and stared at the steam from the vents like it might erase me. The briefcase swung at my side. I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow, like I was moving someone else's legs. But I knew what was coming. The exchange would happen before sunrise, and after that, everything would accelerate. The U-2 flight was on schedule. Powers would fly. Someone would fall. And the briefcase in my hand would be somewhere it wasn't meant to be. I paused by the water. Threw the coin under the bridge. My signal was received. From that moment forward, I wasn't carrying intelligence. I was carrying leverage. And no one knew but me. The envelope hadn't mentioned targets. No coordinates, no schematics, no blueprints. Just one sentence. Intercept the list before it crosses. That's all. Not even a location. But I'd been in long enough to know what they meant. There was a reason no one wanted to say it out loud. When something isn't written, it can't be leaked. When something doesn't exist, it can't be denied. I assumed it was a list of missile sites. Everyone did. That's what we feared. That's what filled the reports and the meetings and the lies. But this was different. The way Greta spoke about it, her voice low, no inflection, not even looking at me, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about deterrence. This was about names, people, the kind you don't find on maps, the kind that vanish. The briefcase didn't hold bombs. It held leverage. And the fuse was already burning. I opened the first file the morning before the switch. Carefully. Gloves on. Curtains drawn. Just enough sunlight to read. Not enough for shadows to move. The page was thin, almost translucent. Typed. Carbon copy. And at the top, Operation Auschog. I'd never heard of it, but I recognized a name 3 lines down. Not a Soviet general, not a German defector. A woman, civilian. Hadn't seen her since '58, when she swore she'd never work for any flag again. Now she was listed next to a location, Wilmersdorf, and something else. A 7-digit code with no prefix. I checked the second page. More names, all Berlin-based, all marked in play. It wasn't a strike list. It was a culling. A purge. Someone on our side wanted it to happen. Greta never broke posture. She sat in a cafe off Friedrichstraße, sipping cold coffee like it was ritual. I approached without a signal. Sat. Slid her a napkin. She didn't look down. She just asked, "Did you read it?" I lied. No. She stared past me at a man buying cigarettes across the street. Good. Then you'll sleep tonight. I wanted to ask her what the list really was, who wrote it, why I was the one sent to bury it, but I already knew the answer, because I was the kind of man who wouldn't ask. She slid me a matchbox, not from the cafe, a different place. Drop. Points moved. Hotel Esplanade, room 313, 3:00 sharp. I pocketed the matchbox. It was warm. She left without finishing her drink. That was the last time I saw her face in daylight. I walked the city like a ghost after that. I knew some of the people on that list. Not well, but enough. Some were cleaners, couriers, linguists, people who thought the war was over, people who thought they'd survived. What would I do if I delivered this? What would I be? I reached a bridge and leaned on the cold iron rail, pulled the matchbox from my coat. Inside, a key and a scrap of newspaper with 2 words underlined. Dispersal protocol. That wasn't a Soviet term. That was ours. It meant wipe them out, quietly, without fuss, without trace. The kind of thing we swore we'd never do. The kind of thing we trained to pretend didn't exist. I lit a match, watched it burn, dropped it in the river. And for the first time since I joined the service, I really thought, about walking away. But I didn't, because deep down, I already knew. The briefcase was never meant for the enemy. It was meant for someone like me. The envelope didn't have a sender, no seal, no emblem, no trace of a chain of command. Just a number, 3 o'clock. and a line of text printed in gray ink so faint it looked like it had tried to vanish. Intercambiar malatan antes de las 3 o'clock, sin preguntas. Greta didn't hand it to me like a message. She placed it on the table, between us, like it was something dead. Her hands always felt cold, but that day they were shaking slightly. I pretended not to notice. She didn't say anything after that, just stood up, adjusted her coat, and walked away. The air around her felt heavy. I don't know if it was guilt or fear. Back in the pension room, I opened the envelope and checked the identifier on the chocolate. Corner, DS-47 dot. It hit me like ice. That program had been shelved 3 years earlier. No operational record. No surviving assets. Unless I was one of them. I sat at the desk, the envelope beside the lamp, and thought about the last time I'd seen DS-47 in play. It was 1957, Budapest, a silent disaster, the kind that never makes it to film. We were meant to observe, not intervene, but something shifted. The order came through an old German radio pro-war tech, and it said, "Terminate the channel." We pulled 6 people from the city. 5 survived. The 6th was a 13-year-old with a sketchpad, full of uniform insignias and a memory that wouldn't forget. We left him behind. Still dream about that SKETCHPAD. Now, the same ghost code was back, and it had my name on it. I needed clarity. So I called Greta again. She didn't pick up. I called. The number listed for internal logistics. Disconnected. I tried the embassy switchboard. They routed me to an old friend, Crowley, who told me to get some rest. His tone wasn't friendly. It was practiced. Rehearsed. I knew what that meant. I was off the books. Detached. GHOSTED. The job still stood. Pulled the briefcase onto the bed and checked the lock again. No scratches. No signs of forced entry. But when I tilted it, I heard the sound, faint, metallic. Irregular. Something inside wasn't paper. The urge to open it right there almost overtook me. Instead, I placed it back into the closet. Far corner. Covered it with my coat. And I stared at it for hours. Night, I went to the archive. The real one. That was under consulate control. I had a copy of my field notes from '58, stored in a hollowed-out ledger at an antiquarian's shop near the train station. I paid the old man extra to leave the back room unlocked. Inside, I cross-checked the term. Dispersal protocol. It came up once, in a redacted briefing dated October 1956. Same code family. DS-47. I followed a footnote to a second term. Manual override Tier V. That wasn't ours. That was Langley's, and it only showed up on internal kill lists. I left the shop. Before dawn. Lisbon still smelled like fish and dust and wet pavement. The kind of smell that settles into your coat, no matter how hard you try to forget where you've been. When I got back to the room, I noticed the lamp was off. I hadn't left it that way. Nothing was missing. Nothing touched. Except the briefcase. Had been moved 2 inches to the right, and there, on the handle, was a fingerprint in the condensation thumbprint. Right hand. Mine had gloves. Someone else had touched it and left it behind on purpose. I reached the esplanade just before 2. The city hadn't woken up yet. No traffic, no laughter, just the scrape of street sweepers and the distant pulse of the U-Bahn under concrete. I wore a raincoat too thin for the weather and shoes too quiet for someone not expecting trouble. The kind of outfit you wear when you want to be seen as nothing at all. The lobby lights were dim. The clerk didn't look up. We had an understanding. He handed me a brass key with no word exchanged. Room 313. But I didn't take the elevator. Not right away. Instead, I walked past it into the old West Wing. The hallway smelled of varnish and old carpets. A renovation that never finished. No cameras, no mirrors. Just a long corridor full of locked doors and broken promises. That's where I found the service stairwell. And the two guards, they weren't ours. Two off-duty Polish security men, uniforms unbuttoned, half-drunk, smoking beside the exit door. They blocked the way like furniture. One of them laughed when he saw me. "You're lost," he said in thick German. I smiled, pulled a matchbook from my pocket, pretended to read it, fumbled it, let it fall. As I bent to pick it up, my other hand slipped the envelope from my coat and slid it behind the fire extinguisher. A soft sound paper against metal dot. He kept laughing. I moved past them, murmured something about the elevator being down. No challenge, no questions. But as I reached the top of the stairwell, I heard one of them cough, then say, Ist zu ruhig." He was right. I was room 313. Didn't exist in the hotel registry dot. It was part of the West Wing that had been damaged in the war. Refurbished, sealed off, listed as storage. But the key Greta gave me worked. The lock turned with a soft click. That felt older than anything else in the building dot inside. Nothing dot no furniture, no curtains. Just a bed frame without a mattress and a table under the window. I placed the briefcase on the table, aligned it with the edge, waited 10 seconds, removed the tag from the handle, and slipped it into my inner pocket. Then I turned and left dot no second briefcase appeared. No contact arrived. No one gave me the nod dot. It felt like throwing a body in a river dot and hoping no one noticed the splash dot as I closed the door. I heard a sound. Not behind me dash above dot a creak in the ceiling boards. I didn't wait to find out what it was. Back down the stairwell. Fast but quiet. Past the guards, who didn't even look up this time. Into the lobby. Toward the elevator now. I pressed the button and heard the mechanism engage. That's when I realized I was holding my breath. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside dot as it began to descend. The lights flickered. Then it stopped. Between floors, I hit the panel. Nothing got, and then I saw it. Not a person. A reflection dot in the polished metal door, just behind me. A shadow, still and tall, dot no breath. No sound. I turned fast dot nothing there dot just me. And the brief moment of silence. Before the power resumed, when the doors opened again, I was at the ground floor, but the lobby was empty. The clerk gone. Even the cigarette butts in the ashtray were fresh, like someone had just stepped away. I didn't wait to understand it. I walked out into the cold and didn't look back, because that was the moment I stopped being an agent, started being the target. The streets outside the Esplanade were washed in fog, thick enough to blur license plates and make faces feel like memories. I crossed to the cafe across the street, ordered something I wouldn't drink, and took the far corner booth, the one facing both exits. A habit I never broke, even when I tried. The coffee sat untouched. My hand hovered above it, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from restraint. I needed to act normal, blend in. But everything about the night was wrong. The empty hotel, the silent clerk, the way the briefcase had vanished like smoke, and most of all, the elevator dot that reflection wasn't mine. I know my shape. I've lived with it long enough. What I saw behind me was taller, broader, still, watching got no breath on the glass. No footsteps, but the presence lingered like something burned into the back of my eyes. I waited 30 minutes before I moved. Enough time to make sure no one followed. Or so I thought. I took the long route back to my flat, past the river, under the overpass, through 2 alleys I knew. Well, nothing behind me but silence. But silence in Berlin means something else. It means someone's already waiting. I reached the door and paused. It was shut. Still locked. I checked the envelope under the tile in the hallway. Still there. Dry. Only. When I stepped inside, did I notice it? Smell. Faint. Chemical. A mix of metal and cheap cologne. Not mine. I placed the revolver on the side table. Didn't draw it. I needed to think. First rule. Don't search in a panic. I checked the desk. Nothing moved. Checked the closet. No dust displaced. Checked the briefcase. Still there. But this wasn't the same case I'd left. It looked identical. Same scuff on the corner. Same handle wear. Same initials scratched into the bottom. But the weight was different. Lighter. Subtler. I sat down and opened it. Empty. Except for one thing. A matchstick. Bent at the center. Wedged into the seam where the lining met the frame. And beside it, tucked into the inner fold, a torn corner of a cigarette carton. Handwritten. One line in red lipstick. Call this number. You know who I am. I didn't need to read the number. I already knew the handwriting. She was supposed to be dead. Gretta. 6 months. That's how long it had been since she'd disappeared. I'd asked, quietly. No answer. Not even a denial. Just one classified file that said, inactive. That's code for, don't ask again. But there it was. Her script. Her pressure. She always looped her sevens like that. In the lipstick. The same one she wore on the last mission we ran together. The one in Vienna, where we left someone in. The cold who shouldn't have been left. She'd kissed the mirror before disappearing that night, smearing the words, no saints here. And now here she was again. Somehow. Alive. Or someone wanted me to think she was. I lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Not from fear, from memory. Each drag tasted like betrayal. I tried to recall if I'd said her name out loud in any report. If I'd whispered it in any briefing. I hadn't. And yet, someone knew. That meant one of two things. She wasn't dead, or I was already supposed to be. The number was local. Berlin Exchange. No code prefix. A burner line. Could be anyone. Could be a trap. Could be her. I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I crushed the matchstick and flushed the carton fragment. Burned the lining. Then I stood by the window and watched the building across the street. One light turned off. Another turned on. Shadows moved, but I felt them anyway. I barely slept. I kept the light on, coat draped over the chair, revolver within. Reach. The fake briefcase sat on the desk like a taunt. Every few hours, I'd glance over and half expect it to start ticking. It didn't, but that didn't mean it was harmless. Just before dawn, I tore out the lining. Slow, careful. I'd done this before, sewn compartments, false seams, voice-activated triggers. But what I found wasn't mechanical. There, tucked between fabric and frame, was the matchstick I'd already seen. But now I noticed something more. A faint powder on the bend. It wasn't from the match. It was from lipstick. Fresh. She'd handled it recently. I slid it into a glass, filled it with water. Let it sit. The lipstick bled red into the water, blooming like guilt. I didn't touch it again. That stain told me enough. She wanted me to know it was her. I called the number. It rang twice. Then silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in half a year. Still pretending you don't smoke Lucky Strikes? Greta. I didn't answer. My throat locked. She waited. Then, you found it, I said. Why now? She ignored the question. The realness never left Berlin. That briefcase? Distraction. Theater. You carried a ghost. Why? Because they needed someone who wouldn't ask. And because I knew you'd do it anyway. I closed my eyes. My hands curled around the edge of the desk. They said you were dead. They always say that, before they use you again? I heard a train whistle in the background. She was near a station. She spoke one last time. They're not after the list. They're after who? Copied it. The line went dead. My reflection in the window looked like someone else entirely. I showered, dressed, and left everything behind except a small recording device hidden inside my belt. I needed proof, something to anchor myself, something they couldn't erase. I took a tram east to the safe house near Treptow. No one used it since the wall went up. I'd kept it functional, just in case. The air smelled like old metal and damp wool. I locked the door behind me, pulled the curtains tight, and laid everything out. 2 matchbooks, the bent stick, the briefcase shell, a map of Berlin with grease pencil marks left by someone else, not mine, and a photograph I hadn't noticed before. Folded and wedged into the gap behind the briefcase lining. It showed a cafe table, 2 cups, a man with his back to the camera, the edge of a familiar coat sleeve. Mine. I'd never sat there, but the photo said otherwise. That meant one thing. Someone was crafting a timeline, one I didn't control, and Greta had just reopened the file. I didn't know where she was, but I knew where she'd go. There was a bar near the old Tiergarten tram depot, closed officially, but still lit some nights. That's where she used to leave notes. I went there at dusk, ordered nothing, waited 2 hours. She never came, but a girl passed me on her way out. Pressed something into my coat pocket. Another matchbook, this time with an address. No note, just a word scrawled on. The inside flap, Crowley. He was never supposed to be part of this, but if Greta dragged him into it, then it meant we were out of time, because Crowley didn't defect. He didn't vanish. He worked for the embassy, and last I heard, he was dead. But maybe, like her, he just learned to disappear first. The next morning, I tuned the shortwave unit in the safe house, the one that only picked up encrypted Eastern military bands. I didn't expect much, as Soviets weren't sloppy with open signals. But sometimes someone got careless, or wanted to be heard. Around 7:12, a broadcast cut through the static. Rapid, clipped Russian. Then, unmistakable, Walton crossed the line. I froze, not the alias, my alias. Walton was burned years ago, a name I hadn't used since Hungary. It never showed up in post 59 files. Only one person could have linked me to it now. Greta, or whoever had access to her. Field reports. No rank, no unit call sign. Just the phrase, buried in a weather update. That wasn't a warning. That was a message. I turned off the radio and let the silence press in. They were telling me 2 things. 1, they knew where I was. And 2, I wasn't theirs anymore. I took apart the safe house in under 5 minutes. Burner IDs, spare passports, half-used currencies, vials of iodine, and codebooks. I torched it all in the fireplace, except one thing, a small cassette player I kept taped under the sink. It had one recording, Greta, 1959, reading a children's book in French. I played it once before leaving. Just once. Her voice cracked on the word Purdue. Lost. I moved across the city like a fever, avoiding cameras, transit checkpoints, and anyone who walked too confidently. I ducked into a Turkish grocer to shave and switch jackets, stole a scarf from a church vestibule, and re-emerged 2 blocks north as someone else. But the feeling stayed. A burn between the shoulders. The slow certainty that someone was watching, even when no footsteps followed. It's not paranoia if you've earned it. Reached the archive microstation, hidden beneath the BVB maintenance office. It hadn't been used in over a year. The lights flickered like they didn't want to remember what they'd seen. I pulled out the records, the ones Greta and I filed under our dead Cody names. Czerny for her, Walton for me, but my file was gone. Not redacted, erased, no card, no microfilm reel. Just a blank in the index where my existence should have been. And hers? There, in the drawer, untouched, but someone had slipped in a new page, not a report. Not a log, just a single sheet. A scanned transcript of a military radio. Intercept from East Berlin. It repeated the same phrase. Walton ha cruzado la línea. Spanish. Not Russian. Not English. I held the paper in both hands and just stared. That wasn't a leak. That was a fabrication. They weren't reporting it. They were broadcasting it, creating it. That meant someone was trying to resurrect a ghost, to build a case that I'd crossed sides, that I wasn't one of theirs anymore. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry. I was suspended, like my identity had been split and handed out like fake IDs to people I'd never meet. They were turning me into a legend, and legends don't get trials. They get erased. I left the archive just before noon. Didn't bother to. Shut the drawer. If anyone followed, they'd see the same thing I saw. A ghost holding a file that should never have existed. Outside, Berlin roared back to life, but the noise didn't reach me, because the next step wasn't about finding Greta. It was about finding whoever lit the match she handed me. The British consulate on Victoria Strange looked the same as always: iron gates, grey facade, the Union Jack asleep in the wind. But something was off. 2 guards at the front instead of 1. Civilian clothes. No pins. No posture. And no familiar nods. I approached slow, briefcase in hand, coat collar up. Before I reached the buzzer, one of them stepped forward. Offices. Closed. I didn't flinch. Since when? Since now. He held the door handle. Not aggressive. Just absolute. I stepped back, pulled out an old contact card. Crowley's. Handwritten note on the back. Use only if burnt. I held it up. The guard didn't look. No one's seen him in weeks. That was a lie. Crowley didn't vanish. Crowley didn't take sick days. He was behind the curtain, watching. And they wanted me to know I wasn't invited. I left the card on. The ledge didn't look back. I took the side alley past the embassy garage, circled toward the rear where diplomatic cars idled behind frosted glass. One window was cracked open, just enough for sound to leak. Inside. Voices. British. 1 American. I heard my name, not Walton. My real one said like a stain they couldn't scrub. The American said, he's already compromised. The Brit replied, then deny him. The door shut before I caught the rest. It didn't matter. I was a contagion now. I found a payphone 4 blocks down. One of the old metal ones, paint peeling. I dialed the emergency override code to the cum line I used to. Reach Langley. It rang 6 times. A voice finally answered. Female, clipped, unfamiliar. Line disconnected. Please contact the central office. I tried the fallback number. Different city. Same voice. Same answer. They weren't blocking me. They'd erased me. I walked the perimeter of the Tiergarten for nearly 2 hours. No destination. Just moving to keep warm, to keep sane. The trees were skeletal. Their shadows longer than they should have been. I thought about the last operation I ran with Crowley. How we buried a coded notebook in a basement under Friedrich's Rage. We said we'd never touch it again. I wondered if he'd gone back for it, if that's why they silenced him. I made one more attempt. The French cafe on Linienstraße, a neutral zone. Friendly staff, no affiliations. Greta once told me it was her parole window, the place where people said things they couldn't say anywhere else. I walked in, sat at the 3rd table. By the wall, the waitress didn't speak, Just placed a cup of black coffee and slid a folded napkin underneath. Not Greta's handwriting, a man's. 3 words. Walk away now. No signature. No date. Just ink, pressure, and intent. I didn't drink the coffee. Didn't move for a long time. I just stared out the window at the embassy across the street, where I once thought the good guys lived. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Because I knew that note wasn't a warning. It was permission. They were telling me to disappear. That if I shut up, vanished, left the pieces where they fell, they wouldn't chase me. They wouldn't need to, because ghosts don't leave footprints. I had just stepped off the map. I kept the negatives in a tin, tucked behind a false panel in my old flat near New Cologne. Most of them were useless, blurry shots from Prague, empty alleys in Budapest, shadows that never became suspects. But one roll I'd held onto without knowing why. It came from a contact long dead, Milish, the Czech archivist, who bled out in a train bathroom before he could hand me the full brief. What I recovered from his coat was half a photo envelope and this roll. I'd never developed it. Not until now. I used a makeshift dark room in the cellar of a butcher's shop, the one that smelled of rust and lard. I poured the chemicals like ritual, fingers stained with old memories. The images came slow, grainy, heavy. Frame by frame, a meeting room came into focus. Soviet uniforms, cigarette haze, a calendar on the wall. Minsk, 1956, and in the back, me, or someone who looked like me. Same build, same coat, same scar over the brow. Only one problem. I wasn't in Minsk in 56. I was on assignment in Naples, under a different name, chasing a mole who vanished in the sun. I stared at that frame like it might blink back. It didn't. I developed the rest. 11 images, all taken from the same angle. Someone had hidden in the vent or used a long lens. Every shot had that same silhouette, mine, hovering near the edge. Unmistakable, undeniable. The more I looked, the less sure I became, not just of where I was, but of who I was. Took the print and went to the only person left who might know the truth. Jurgen, the photo analyst who owed me a favor. We met in the back of a bookstore that sold banned poetry. He wore gloves, glasses, a face that had aged wrong. He held the photo under the light and just muttered, "That's you." "No," I said. He looked again, frowned, then pointed to the corner. "That's a triple overlay. Composite. Your face has been layered in." "Why?" He shrugged. "To bury something else." "Like what?" He didn't answer. Just handed me back the photo and said, "Whatever it was, they didn't want it to be remembered alone." On the way out, I passed a man pretending to read. He wasn't part of the store, and he wasn't reading. I didn't stop, didn't run, just disappeared into the fog like I'd done too many times before. That night, I stared at the photo again, pinned it to the wall above the desk in my temporary room, a hostel where no one asked for ID. I lit a cigarette, let the ash fall on the floor, and I thought, if they could fake my presence there, where else had they planted me? What else had they made me guilty of? There was no way to prove it wasn't me. No time stamp, no defense. Just my face, staring back from a war room where I never stood. I tore it down, not out of denial, but because I knew someone would come looking, and I wanted to be the one watching. This time, so I rewound the negative, slid it into a fresh envelope, wrote one word on the back, "Why?" and mailed it to the last address I had for Greta. I didn't expect an answer, but I couldn't carry it alone anymore, because if they could fake a photo, they could fake a betrayal, and maybe they already had. She found me at Sudcruise Station, Platform 3, the one where trains don't stop anymore. I was lighting a cigarette with the wind cutting sideways when I heard her voice, low, measured, like she never left. "You're still smoking those," she said. I turned slowly. Gretta. Same. Coat. Same eyes, but thinner, colder. Got a wrinkle, just less warmth in her outline. Like time had scraped away the unnecessary parts of her. "I sent you the negative," I said. "I know." She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me like she was bracing for a wave. "It's real," I said. She nodded. "Real enough." We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. Just stood there, two ghosts wrapped in old coats, while the city groaned under the weight of its secrets. Then she said it. The file wasn't for the Russians. It was for Langley. I didn't move. "That makes no sense." "It does if you—" "Except one thing," she said. "They were cleaning house. We sat on a bench that hadn't been cleaned in years. Trains passed, empty, unannounced. She took out a small envelope, slid it to me. Inside, a list of names. No ranks, no affiliations, but I knew them. Code breakers, cultural liaisons, whisper traders, people who ran the wires and the whispers and kept Berlin breathing. "Why them?" I asked. "They were liabilities," she said. "Too much contact, too many shared secrets." I looked up. "That's everyone." She shrugged. "Not yet." I ran my finger down the page until I saw one name scratched out in red. "You switched the briefcases," I said. "You knew what was inside." She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it. "You made me part of it." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No, they did. I just let you live." I stood. My hands felt heavier than before. "Is Crowley alive?" She blinked, hesitated. Then, "Not in a way that matters." I sat back down. Not because I forgave her, because my knees gave out. "They sent me in blind," I said. "They always do." "So what was the real target?" She lit a match, shielded the flame with her hand, watched it burn down. The briefcase was the bait. The radio message was the trap. You were the signal. I didn't understand. She saw it in my face. They needed proof the list had been duplicated. So they made you carry the copy. Waited to see who'd follow you, who'd whisper, who'd run. She looked away. "You flushed out half the informants in Berlin without knowing it. And the others?" She didn't answer, but I already knew. We walked to the end of the platform. She handed me a lighter, my old one, brass, decked on the side. I hadn't seen it in years. I thought I lost this. "You did," she said, but I never threw it away. The train tracks stretched out like veins. Nothing moved. Not even the birds. "I'm tired, Greta." She nodded. "We all are." I looked at her one last time. "Why tell me this now?" Her eyes glinted, because someone has to remember what really happened. And then she walked into the fog, gone before I could ask if she'd ever really come back. The lighter fell too, warm in my hand, like it still remembered her touch. I turned it over once, then again. The dent was exactly where I left it, or where she found it. Hard to say now. I climbed the stairs to the rooftop of the old tenement on Kiefhalstrasse, that one we used back when messages were left on laundry. Lines and dead drops were sewn into coats. Nobody lived there anymore. Nobody who mattered. It took 3 locks and a shoulder slam to reach the top. The wind met me hard. Berlin below looked like an animal curled up in its own silence. I unwrapped the duplicado from the lining of my coat. Not the real one, of course. I never saw the original. Just a copy of a copy. Pages thinned from handling. The ink already smudged at the edges. But the names were still legible. Too many of them. I didn't read them. I couldn't. I knew some were innocent, and I knew some were dead because of me. I built a small pile of bricks, old and cracked from years of rain, and lit a flame under them. It took a while, too long, as if the paper didn't want to burn, but eventually it did. The smoke smelled like plastic and skin. I stood there, coat flapping, watching the ink curl and scream and vanish. One name at a time, one guilt, one betrayal, and then it was gone. The last piece of it, the proof. And maybe that was the worst part. I'd never know who I'd damned. Back in the stairwell, I sat on the step for a long time, breathing in the ash still clinging to my sleeves. I thought of Crowley, of the archives, of the way Greta's face never trembled, even when she talked about ghosts. I tried to remember each name I saw. I couldn't. They blurred. That was the trick, wasn't it? You erase enough, and nobody's left to remember the original. I reached into my coat and pulled out the cassette recorder I hadn't used in years. Clicked it on. Whispered one line. They used me. I let them. Then I rewound the tape, walked to the edge of the roof, and dropped it into a ventilation shaft that fed into the bakery below. A place I once trusted. A place now filled with strangers. As I turned to go, I caught something in the distance. Not movement. A glint. A flash from a window. A reflection. Someone was watching. I didn't run. Didn't freeze. I raised a hand, lit a fresh cigarette, and inhaled. Let them see. Let them record. There was nothing left to take from me now. On the way down, I passed the mirror in the stairwell. The one cracked down the center, like it had been slapped too many times. My reflection looked tired, thinner, meaner. But alive. I reached the street and turned left. Past a newsstand, a school, a dog tied to a railing. Normal things. Things I no longer touched. There was a girl on the corner, maybe 19, hair tucked under a red beret. She handed out flyers for a play. I took one. She smiled. The play was about betrayal in wartime. I laughed. She didn't understand. No one ever does. I kept walking until my legs ached, until the buildings blurred, until I forgot what day it was. I remembered this. The names are gone. The paper is ash, but the orders, they never burn. They echo, and some nights I still hear them in my sleep. Deliver it. No questions. And I did? God help me, I did. The river doesn't ask questions. It just keeps moving, dragging whatever you drop into it down where no one looks. That morning, I stood at its edge with my coat buttoned wrong and my fingers stained. With ash, the lighter Greta returned sat in my pocket like a stone. No one else was there. Just seagulls circling things they didn't understand. Across the water, a fairy horn cried once, low, guttural, like an animal calling to another that never answers. I lit a cigarette and stared at the current. The briefcase was gone. The list burned. The archive edited. But I was still here. And that, I think, was the point. Because what they needed wasn't silence. They needed someone to carry the weight. Someone to remember everything but never speak. Someone expendable. I took out the photograph. The one of me in the Minsk meeting room I never entered. The corners were soft now, as if guilt had worn them down. I folded it once, then again, tossed it into the water. It didn't sink right away. It floated. Mocking me. I turned my back. On the bench behind me sat a small envelope. No one in sight. No footsteps. Just there. I opened it. Inside, a note in Greta's hand. You stopped the fire, but not the fuse. And beneath it, a contact sheet. Names, locations, updated codes. Different paper. Same mission. Same blood. I tore it in half, then into quarters. Then again, dropped it into a nearby trash bin. Let someone else decide what to do with it. I walked the edge of the spree for what felt like hours. boots heavy with everything I never said, passing monuments to causes no one believes in anymore. I stopped under a bridge where we once passed messages in hollow bricks, ran my hand over the wall, still hollow, still ready. I left nothing inside, nothing. Left to hide. At the cafe by the overpass, a young man watched me too long. Suit too pressed, hair too neat. He stirred tea without drinking. I stared back, daring him. He blinked first. I smiled, briefly. I was no longer a threat. That's the thing about survivors. We don't fit into the story. We just ruin the ending. 1 block away, the bells of a small chapel rang 10 times. A woman tossed breadcrumbs for birds that never came. The war ended, then it restarted, and it moved somewhere else. But here, it never left. I leaned on the railing and watched the water catch. Light in fragments. Maybe the file saved someone. Maybe it got a child across the border. Kept a name off a wall. Prevented a bullet from finding its mark. Or maybe I just delayed the inevitable. That's what haunts me. Not the lies, but the possibility that my treason only bought them time. And not enough of it. I lit my last cigarette and let the lighter fall. It hit the water without a sound. Some stories don't end. They just stop getting told. After that morning by the spree, I didn't vanish. I just stepped out of frame. No passports, no missions, no more names that weren't mine. They erased the operation, scrubbed the files, changed the map, left the monuments intact, but the crack stays in walls, in faces, in the spaces between memory and myth. Greta disappeared again. Maybe for good this time. I never looked. I never burned another name. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes I wonder if someone else took the briefcase that night. If I just carried the echo while the real betrayal slipped by unnoticed. I'll never know. But I still see that file in my dreams. Still hear the lighter drop into the river. And every time I wake, I ask the same question. Did I save anyone? Or did I just make the fire harder to trace? If you made it this far, tell me what you knew about this story, or what you thought you knew. And if you're still here, still listening, subscribe. Some ghosts don't stay buried forever.